Welcome back to the channel, folks, and to part 2 of our guide on how to paint the classic Flak36 Platoon box set from Flames of War. This episode we're going to be detailing the guns and the transports. So here are the vehicles and the guns after airbrushing and a clear coat. So the next step is going to be to wash them, and I do that by an enamel pin wash. There are other ways of washing. The pin wash is the most precise that will result in the least undesired darkening down of the overall surface of the figure. If you apply a wash to the entire surface, especially a small figure, it's going to darken it down. It's not got big panels to catch a lot of light. So I use enamel washes. I mix them up. I don't work straight from the bottle. I mix them up in my ceramic palette, which I will show you. Now, I like to leave 24 hours between clear coating and washing with enamels. The solvents in here, there's a bit of solvent in here that I'm going to use to thin it, and whilst the acrylic paint and clear coat shouldn't react to it, sometimes it does, and it can lift the paint off. Especially I would recommend you don't put the decals on before you do the wash either, because the thinner will damage that. Even if you've applied a coat of varnish to protect it, the thinner can still seem to lift the decal off. So stick the decals on after you've done the bin wash. So I'm going to start by showing you how I prepare it and then how I apply it. Okay, let's give that bottle a stir. If I've used it regularly, I'll just give it a shake, but I've not used this bottle for a couple of weeks maybe. So I'm just putting some paint out onto the palette, and there's a wee sort of hint for you folks. You can use a bit of blue tack to keep your bottle from tipping over. I'm taking some thinner, mixing it up to the desired consistency, which is really quite thin, keeping some extra thinner for cleaning purposes. And there you go, you can see the paint just following, capillary action following along all the details, and it's not significantly darkening the surface around it. Now we're into clean up, and you can see the brush is really quite small, folks. It's not a big brush I'm using here at all, and I'm drawing the excess wash into the recesses or off completely. Same again with the half tracks. This is a larger vehicle with some larger areas. Oh, and then the really complex gun, the mounting mechanism, the recoil. There's just so much going on with this. So I'm hitting a lot of the flat surfaces as I'm going here. There's not much choice in that, to be honest. I just have to be very careful in the cleanup to make sure I'm drawing as much of that excess wash off as possible. And here we go. And maybe times as well, by the way, when you're putting the wash on, that you need to go back and just add another couple of little bits. It's not necessarily a process you can do in a winner. Here I'm adding some more to various points. And then this, once again, has got a hell of a lot going on in a very small area, so I need to be careful. I need to shade everything, but only in those recessed areas or around the raised areas and such likes, and keep the flat areas as clean as possible. I don't wait until the wash is dried, as I see most demonstrators on Facebook, if that's the word, Facebook, on YouTube do. I work it straight away, pull it back into recesses, into panel lines. And here we go with the guns. There's not a hell of a lot on the guns, just lots of little small areas. Just make sure you get them all. Keep the flat areas as clear as possible, and then you can draw everything off again with a clean brush. And it will soon be ready for those shades to be accented with highlights. And then also just a big bit of lumping it in, big brush, big wash here. I like this big brown wash to give shade to the running gear, the wheels, and the track wheels, at least not the tyres and the tracks. I'll do them separately. Okay, tracks and wheels, folks. I'm going to be using two colours for this, as well as a metallic dry brush on the tracks. So starting with the tracks, I can use quite a wide range of base colours, but I choose to use olive drab in most cases. It's an earthy kind of colour, which is a good base colour. I've also used Vallejo track primer from the Platoon range. Kind of speaks for itself, but it's a very appropriate kind of colour to use. It's a slightly lighter and stonier version of the olive drab. But you can also use grey, you can use sort of reddish browns like this has already got on it if you wanted a rusty look. There's lots of different options, but they're all going to be applied in the same manner. So here we go. So I always use an old brush for this job because it can be quite punishing on a new brush, and you don't want to just waste a new brush doing all this legwork. And I make sure the brush is flexible enough to get into all the deep areas that you'll find on tracks. So next up is going to be a dry brush of gunmetal grey. So you need to be careful when you're dry brushing. It's very easy to hit the surrounding areas, whilst it's often easy to fix any mistakes on the wheels or other parts of the running gear. You don't want to have lots of silver flecks on the lower hull. So now we're ready to do the tyres. I've cleaned my water after cleaning the brush with metallic paint on it. If you don't, there's little flecks of metallic paint floating around in there. You don't want to transfer them onto the figure, just as the same as you don't want to touch the metallic parts and then touch the rest of the figure, because that will move the paint around. But for the tyres I use Platoon dark rubber. It does what it says on the bottle, so to speak, but any old dark grey will do, and I tend to avoid using black because it's a very stark kind of colour. So a bit of care is needed here, so use a better quality of brush, but once again, it doesn't have to be my best quality of brush. I'm not painting something with really complex detail. And you'll see I'm moving the kit around so that I can paint in nice easy arcs, and I'm not having to reach around features to try and find that detail. And the tyres are much more straightforward because of their size, but you just got to watch how the rim of the tyre, the rim of the wheel is moulded, and whether or not it's quite easy to go over it with the brush. So just a bit of care required there. So there you go, folks. Wheels, tracks, running gear, all done. I've got one thing still to do, but I'll do it later on in the process, and that is putting a wash of pigment powder onto the wheels, not the rubber rims on the half tracks, but just on the wheels. It's a tedious job, seems to take forever, but it starts to help bring the vehicle alive, you can start to make out lower hull, upper hull and such like. So next stage is going to be another time consuming one, but one that really helps define shape, and that's going to be highlighting and edge chipping. Okay, for the guns and the bogies, I'm going to use my go-to highlighting colour, which is Iraqi sand. First thing I'm going to do is some edge highlighting, and then with a finer brush I will do light chipping with Iraqi sand again, and then some black brown in the interior of those light chips and scratches. So this part is fairly straightforward. So I'm back to using a bit of a beat up brush here, because this is another process that will definitely wear your brush out. And you see I'm just using the flat edge of the brush to catch the open edges of the kit. Any internal areas I would want to use a better quality brush to paint them. Like here, this brush has got a bit of a point on it, so I can start working highlights in around the shading, so you can see the shape of the centre of the platform coming out there, accentuating certain outer edges, little points of detail like little bolts or fittings. This is what I call internal highlighting, not edge highlighting, so I use a better quality brush for that. There's quite a lot, as you can see, on the gun, but it's not too bad. It's not too bad. And you can see I'm now putting, with the same better quality brush, with a half decent point, I'm now putting the light scratches on. I'm trying to keep them asymmetrical, keep them thickest where they would expect to be, around edges and such like, but also breaking up larger areas with scratches. And that's something that's also important when you're painting the gun shields, because it's got some very large areas. I'll try and stay in camera here, folks, or in shot rather. You can see me hitting the edges to begin with, just as before. And there's a hell of a lot of edges on one of these guns, in front of the shield, behind the shield, the gun itself. It's never ending. But that's why you need to be patient, especially when you're doing chipping as well as edge highlighting. If you're impatient, your quality of work will deteriorate, and the chips will be too big, there'll be too many of them, and all in the wrong places. So once you've done it a few times, you know what's right, and you just stick to it. You can see so many different lines to catch, but in doing all those lines, I'm accentuating the subtle shades that's on there to create the depth and the shape that is needed. There's a lot going on with these guns. And then I'm on to some scratches, and this is where you definitely can go over the top. I'm hitting corners first of all. They would get a bit more wear and tear, and that'll guide me on where I'm going to go with the more visible scratch lines. But you see I'm putting them on really thin and not going on thick. And I'm in some cases putting the scratch lines coming out of those corners. And you can see it's helping to break up the surface and also give it a bit more depth. And then once again, these little bogies are a lot of work for these little guys, hitting all the edges to begin with. And once again, there's a lot of edges. And then moving to a better quality brush. Apologies for wandering out of shot again. I'm now adding a few scratches. There are a few larger areas, even those little boxes to the front of the bogey there. Getting some scratches across them will just help Give them a little bit more shape. Helps draw the eye and focus the eye. And then I've got my German Camel Black Brown, and I'm starting to fill in with a very thin brush with a very fine point. This is an Insane Detail brush. Starting to fill in most of those lines, and you can see me sort of like bouncing it up and down the edges as well. That works particularly well on light vehicles. Giving a light vehicle a dark edge really helps to define the shape. Lots of work and patience required again here, folks. Okay, these guys are a little bit trickier because of the unusual camo. I'm going to stick to the same principles that I did for like the gun shields. The base colour underneath is a dark yellow. The base colour for this is grey, the base colour for this is red. So I'm going to use this light rust colour just because it's a complementary lighter colour, not because I want it to look rusty, but that would be a good highlight. And London grey for the command car. So I'll start with that. And just as before, I'm going to start with a not so good brush to do the edges. So back to edge highlighting. This has got internal and external edges just to give us a bit more work to do. I'm not worried about any area where there is yellow camo at the moment. I'm just hitting every edge. The yellow camo will have to look after itself in a minute. And you can see there's grills and engine grills and front grills and so on. And then I'm also working those internal areas with a better quality brush, hitting the door handles. That was edges of panels. I also have to remember to do the internal features as well. But you can see all this is helping to just lift that shade, make it pop a bit more, give a bit more shape. And then we don't have to do any edge highlighting for the yellow, but I'm using the Iraqi sand just to catch any internal areas or handles or such likes that are in the dark yellow, and just to help that, you can see how it's starting to lift more out of the base grey and define door edges, panel edges, fenders and so on. And here I am doing the same on the half tracks. It's getting a lot brighter, looking a bit less red as we go. And then we're on to some red here, just hitting edges first of all. Here I'm being careful to avoid the yellow areas. And I'm out of shot. Apologies. And then on to a finer brush, and we'll start working on those panel edges again. Remember, when you're edge highlighting, you don't have to hit the entire edge of the feature to get the effect. A broken edge will work too. Right, time to start detailing the vehicles. So this one's got pre-sculpted stowage, and this one I sculpted some stowage. I just used a couple of the ammo boxes, this that I found lying about, and a piece of green stuff folded up to look like a folded up tarp. It's right under that, but it's a great way of sticking stowage on. It's not like super glue, you know, where the shape of the stowage doesn't necessarily match the surface you want to super glue it to. Green stuff will grip both sides. So I've got seats to do, some stowage to do. I'm going to give everything a coat to begin with of German Camel Black Brown. So the canopies and covers for the windscreens, they're all going to be painted with Platoon German Field Grey, well it's German Tanker 2 Field Grey, and with a highlight of Platoon Africa Core. So I'm approaching the painting of these features in the same way as I would infantry figures. You see, I'm following the details, leaving shade where there are recesses, building up the general shape with a view to going back over it once I've got that shape, giving it a second coat, but also defining the shapes that I want to see. Here again, following the shape. Now there's not a lot of recessed areas on the cover at the back, so I'm leaving shades, lines of shade that I can then add a highlight to, as you see me doing here. It's quite a busy little tap, there's a lot going on, so you can paint it in a more simple way if you wish, but there's a lot of, the tap's getting pulled over the windscreen, and you can see me here also just highlighting some of the stowage in the same way. So next up, the seats and benches in the half tracks. I'll be using German Camel Medium Brown on both of them. I'm going to put orange brown as a highlight in the staff car and US Field Drab as a highlight in the half tracks, because this is a bit too close to the main half track colours. So I'm trying to make the seats have a little bit of detail. You can see me just painting lines on as opposed to painting across the feature. And I'm hoping to leave a little bit of shade in there that I can add some highlight to, just to make it look a little less flat. And you see me just drawing the highlight up, drawing across, to try and create a sort of worn leather type of look. Same again here, I've already put the base colour on. Now I'm using that lighter colour of highlight colour, and then just try to create that worn leather look, and of course get rid of some of that red that's still on this vehicle. And then I'm working on stowage, any areas of stowage where I can use that same US Field Drab colour. And here I'm just creating the different planks, so to speak, of the box, starting on the outside and then going into the middle. That way you don't end up with an awkward size plank at the end. And with the highlights in the mid colour here, and I'm using that same colour as you can see on the ammo crates. It is possible to get a nice set of complementary colours on a vehicle, but then swap it over and use it on a different piece of stowage or another vehicle. It means you can save yourself quite a bit of time in between pots of paint. And there I'm going in with the highlight, the Iraqi sand, try and make it really pop. There's a lot of stowage on these, but it's going to make a big difference to the eventual look. For the jerry cans, base colour German Camel Beige German Camel Beige World War II, and deck tan for a highlight. This is quite a fiddly feature to paint. There's so much internal detail, you know, underneath the rack that's holding them all, but it's such an important detail that you have to spend a bit of time. Individual jerry cans, they're a lot better, so there's some of them are moulded just as pretty much a big lump, so just make sure that you're creating as much of the detail in the piece as is required. You can see here I'm trying to create a boxy look, and then going in with some highlight just to finish that. Now there's 4 other pieces of fabric, one there, one underneath, one there and one there. So I'm going to use dark mud with a highlight of green grey and green grey with a highlight of splinter camel base. So looking to follow the lines that are there and presented to us in the sculpt, watching that I'm not putting any paint onto the tie downs, just filling everything in, looking for the features, very much as I would do so when I was painting infantry, and as you'll see when I'm painting the crew. That's a lighter colour I'm using, so it's going to take a couple of coats. Here I am painting the rack now. I wanted something that would stand out against the contents, basically, so I've gone really bright, and then I'm going to tone it down with a bit of a rust coloured wash or glaze. You might want to call it a glaze. A wee touch up there too. Okay, so here we go, just tone that down a bit, like it's a rough piece of kit, as opposed to a maintained part of the vehicle, just something that's been welded on. So the various ropes. Now it's time for the boxes. Flat F. Oh, not the boxes, my apologies. I'm painting the tie downs, the ropes and such likes on all the bits of stowage. Being careful to leave a bit of shade. And then good old wood to highlight the straps, to highlight those ropes. So the detailing has all been done. A couple of things to note. First of all, I changed the tarp colour on the horse. The green just disappeared into the grey. Didn't look very good. And I've also painted some internal lines just to show where the doors are, because there's no internal detail on the sides, and that just adds a nice wee bit of explains what's going on when you look on the inside. I have put the base colour, or the earth colour rather, onto the bases for the vehicles, as you can see. I've got one more thing to do actually that I've forgotten about. I'm going to paint the underside of the vehicle, the half tracks rather, with German grey. It's a very dark grey, just so it doesn't look so red, but it's nice and dark underneath. So I'm going to do that, and I'm also going to apply some pigment to the wheels, and by that I mean to the rubber on the wheels. And I'll go through that process with you. And I'm also going to use the same process, same pigment on the bases, but only on the earth on the bases. Now just a little word about what I've done with the bases. Let's get that over here. I used, the main colour for the base is Panzer Aces Highlight German Camel Black, but it gives a nice earthy brown colour. And then for the tree, for the logs, I used US olive drab. It's a nice stony, browny kind of colour. That's a good base colour for trees, because trees aren't really brown. You know, they're covered in grey lichen and moss and all kind of things. So that's a good base colour. And then good old German camel, black brown on all the various components. That will be lots of different colours. There will be lots of this colour you see there on the ammo box, because not only is there lots of ammo boxes, they've also got a lot of them, the lids off them getting used on the ground for the crews to stand on. So I'll show you that pigment work, and then that will be the end of this segment of the video. Here is my very, very messy pigment palette. I basically just tip it out into here, mix it up as required. You can see I've got some Umbro pigments, some MIG pigments, some Tamiya weathering sticks. Some of them are quite good, especially the soot. And I just basically mix it up, as you're going to see. I'm going to go for a lighter pigment on the wheels than on the bases. I want the wheels to look separate from the bases to help have the weathered and used look that I want the tyres to have, but I don't want them to just disappear into the background. Now, pigment powder is a very strong substance. It just looks like very, very thin paint, but it's thick with pigment. So you're going to have to apply it very carefully. You put on some, let it dry, and then see what you've got. Don't think, I'll put on some, oh I can't see anything there, I'll add some more, oh I can't see anything, I'll add some more. Before you know it, you're going to have a thick, thick, thick layer of pigment. So I've used some of the Umbro pigment. I find that it's, how to put it, a bit greasy, you know, so it's quite good for sort of muddy conditions, which is what I want. I'm using old brushes. I want to mix up a pigment for the tyres. So I'm taking some of that Umbro. I shall clean my brush. And then I'm going to take some of the dry mud pigment, which, if you can see here for the little dry lumps, it's really quite light. I'm going to add that to get something in between. What you're seeing there isn't necessarily what the finished colour is going to be, by the way. You'll only get that with practice. So I'll just clean that brush and I'll start applying it to the wheels. So I'm using a small brush here because I am applying it to a small area. And we really want it applied to that particular area. We want it on the tyres and the wheel wells, or the arches rather, but we don't want it on the rest of the vehicle. That's not the look we're after. Same on the half track. And I'm not applying it to the tracks because we're just going to end up covering up all the work we've done. And we really just after weathering the tyres at this point in the process. That's all we're worried about. And then you've got many more tyres to go here with all of these bogies. Got to be careful when with the very prominent tyre tread there. You've got to be careful that you're getting the pigment into them all, into all the treads. And then onto a bigger brush for the bases. So I'm just slapping it all over, folks. I'm trying to avoid anything that's going to get painted later, but I don't have to be too careful here. That's why I'm using the bigger brush. So there's the pigments dry.
Now that's everything completed. You can see the difference between the wheels for the spare wheel compared to the wheels that are on the road at the moment.
Carefully draw your finger,
and hopefully you can see the difference in sort of texture now on the bases too.
after. You can see it in the
there you go, they're good to go.
latch there. Of course, with pigments you can go to town and weather the whole lot, but you know that's not what I'm trying to do here.